Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, praise be to Allah, and peace be upon His Prophet Muhammad, his family, friends, and followers until the day of judgment. Today, inshallah, we are going to continue in tax on revenue of non-commercial profession. Tax and revenues of non-commercial professions. Last time, in face-to-face lecture, I started this one, and I dealt with the scope of the tax, and I distinguish between profession and non-commercial, and I mentioned the difference between them, and I defined each of them. And I told you that the bylaw mentioned 30 categories of these non-commercial profession. Among this one, legal profession, medicine, engineering, journalism, a composition of scientific and literary completion, including delivery of technical, scientific, and literary speeches, accountancy and auditing, expertise, translation, religious reading and recitations, drawing, singing, playing, musical, fashion shows, customer clearance, etc. I mentioned 30 of these ones when I explained these categories of these professions came in the bylaw. Then I mentioned the condition for leaving the tax. There are 4 conditions for leaving this tax. The first one I mentioned before is practice of the profession on the activity with the intention of achieving profit. So, main reason for practicing this profession or these activities is the intention of achieving profit. So, if it is for sake of Allah, it's not a profession in this case. The other condition I mentioned before, that independent practice of the profession of the activity. He should be independent when he practices his profession. So, as I mentioned, he is supervised with nobody, he is controlled with nobody. He practices his profession independently, as I mentioned. The third one I mentioned before, labor or work should be dominant factor in providing the service. Sometimes we need capital, as I mentioned, but the main one in this non-commercial profession is labor or work. And also, from the condition, the practice of the profession or the activity continually. It's not for once, but he should be continue to practice this profession. These are the 4 conditions, and the important and the last one for consider anyone is non-commercial is the practice of the profession in Egypt. The practice of the profession in Egypt is the last one and the main one, as I mentioned in the lecture. So any activity out of Egypt is not considered as, it is not considered as non-commercial profession or is not taxable here in Egypt. Then I came to determination of the tax bracket. Determination of the tax bracket or tax base. It includes revenues and expenses. Revenues, it is different from profession to profession. Each one has its own characteristics as a profession, and the items should be taxable. It is different from one profession to another. So I mentioned the revenues for each one. For example, medicine, law, auditing, and so on. Each one is the items is different from one profession to another. Then revenues to be taxable, it has some characteristics. The main one is should be a result from the practicing of the profession in Egypt, as I said. And the other one, there is some secondary revenues or incidental revenues. I mentioned it when I explained the revenues. For example, I explained the capital gains, and I explained rent from renting, from subleasing, and intellectual property, revenues of intellectual property, and transversal revenues. These are different, and I explained it before. So revenues should be mentioned, and the tax authority ask the taxpayer when they prepare the tax declaration to mention these revenues in a form. I explained it in the lecture, and it is mentioned in your book, as you see in page 159. This is the revenues should be in this arrangement in the tax declaration. All this I explained before. I just remind you with these revenues, and then we should come to expenses. Expenses should be deducted as it is necessary for practicing the profession. Should be considered when we compute the expenses. But there are some expenses, it might have some problems. So I am going now to explain it. For example, if we have, for example, rent. Rent is allowed to be deducted as monthly or half year or for the whole year according to the contract between the profession and the leaser, so it is deductible. But in case of the ownership of the building you practice or the profession practices his profession on it, in this case we should compute rental value. Rental value is the value of rent. We assume that this one as paid to achieve the equality between the professions, the one who owns his building and the one who rents his building. The one who rents, it is deducted, the rent. It will be unfair if the one who owns, we don't compute this rental value. So we compute rental value and consider it as cost, should be deducted. Then we have salaries and wages of the assistants and workers that are actually paid in cash. Salaries and wages of the assistants and workers that are actually paid in cash are deducted as an expense. But we meet with some problems here, is the salaries and the wages paid to relatives of the profession, his son, his wife, his father, his father-in-law, etc., his brother-in-law, whatever. So we have three conditions to consider these salaries of the relatives of the professions. The first one is the one who receives the salary should perform an actual work. The second one, this salary received should be equal to the others. Should be equal to the others. What we call it, shouldn't exceed the equivalent salaries. The amount he receives shouldn't exceed the equivalent salaries. But if it exceeds, we consider only the equivalent and we neglect the what exceed, the excess of the equivalent salary. We don't take it into consideration. We only deduct the equivalent salary. The third one, the profession should keep records for the names and the amounts paid and deduct the due salary tax. So these are the conditions or the problems which we meet us when we compute salaries and wages for the assistants and the workers. Also, we have costs of the material used in providing the service to the clients. This one includes materials used and measured on the cash basis. It is include materials used and measured on the cash basis. So, if there is an exists significant amount of materials left, so it didn't deduct it. It is considered as an inventory for the next taxable year, and it shouldn't be deductible. Also, we have travel and transportation expenses. Travel and transportation expenses, should be deducted as long as it is not personally related to the staff members of the office or the profession. It should be deducted as long as it is related to the profession. It is not personal. Also, we have sundry expenses should be deducted from revenues, like insurance premium against the profession risk, against fire, theft, risk of breach of the contract, and otherwise according to the nature of each profession. These should be deducted. These sundry expenses should be deducted besides electricity, water, gas, telephone, etc. Also, we have subscription to the scientific and the professional societies. And the stamp expenses for the profession, like medicine, engineers, etc. And the cost of printed materials. So, also we have cost of references, books, and scientific magazines, and the newspaper required for the profession. Also, we have legal expenses arising from conducting the professional activities. For example, lawsuit, by a client against the professional conduct, court fees, and the attorney's fees for collecting due fees from clients. So, all legal costs should be included and should be deducted. Also, we have depreciation expense of the asset owned by the professions, and this is calculated according to an actual basis and according to the tax depreciation rate and the schedules approved by the tax administration. Then we have also joint expense. Joint expense is the expense as part of the profession and personal expense, like telephone expense, rent expense, if the flat between the accommodation for the profession and for his clinic and his office. So mobile, car, or anything is used by the profession and by the personal used. We should deduct 2/3 of these expense only, and excluding the other 1/3 against personal use. So personal use has 1/3 and the profession has 2/3 of these joint expenses. Sometimes we have undocumented expense. Undocumented expense is necessary for conducting the activities, but not always supported by documents. These expenses include cleaning of the office, buying of books and newspaper, gratitude, travel and transportation expense, profit expense, and the tips. These kind of undocumented expense should be deducted, but shouldn't exceed 7% of the total administrative expense of the taxpayer. Again, these undocumented expense should be deducted, provided that it shouldn't exceed 7% of the total administrative expense of the taxpayer. These expenses, with its problems, I explained it to you, so should be deducted with the conditions I mentioned for each type. Then, when we deduct these expenses, we reach to the net profits before donations. Then we come to donations. Donations, we differentiate between 3 types of donations. Donations that are paid to the government, local administration units. It is deducted, provided that you shouldn't make losses. It means you should pay this one, but not to make losses, not to exceed the revenues you achieved. This is the amounts paid to the government and the local administration unit. Then the same like local administration unit is public authorities, but actually is not many of them there now. Before it was very public authorities, but now there are not many of these. So government or local administration unit. Donations and contributions paid to charitable societies and the Egyptian social organization registered according to the provisions of the law, and to the scientific institutions and his hospitals under the control and supervision of the government. These amount paid not exceed 10% of the annual profit. It shouldn't exceed 10% of the annual net profit. So again, the first type of donations which pay to government and the local administration units, it shouldn't be deducted in full, provided that it shouldn't exceed the total revenues or net revenues before donations. Any other revenues paid is not deductible. For example, donation to poor students, to poor people, to any unregistered societies is not deductible. So it's not deducted at all. So we have only two types of donations deducted: the revenues, the donations paid to the government units and local administration units, and they deducted in full, and the one paid to charitable societies and social institutions and the hospitals supervised by the government shouldn't exceed 10% of annual net profit. This is the donation, and this is very important. Before the donation deducted, as you know, we should have some revenues. These revenues all the expenses deducted from it, and then it comes to revenues before donations, and then we deduct the donations and we reach it to the net profit after donations. when we reach to the net profession after donations, we have to deduct amounts paid to syndicate for pensions. Amounts paid to syndicate for pensions and life insurance premium. The two items, the amounts paid to syndicate for pensions and life insurance premium, shouldn't exceed 3,000 per year. Shouldn't exceed 3,000 per year. If they exceed 3,000, we deduct only 3,000 and we didn't deduct the rest. So we deduct 3,000 for the two items, amounts paid to syndicates for pension, and here there is a condition here. The profession shouldn't have another pension. For example, if I have a physician or a doctor and he works in a hospital in the morning and in the afternoon he has his own clinic, and he is an non-commercial profession in this case. So because he have compulsory system of pension, we shouldn't deduct any amounts paid to syndicates for pension in this case. Then we pay only for life insurance premium, but not exceed 3,000. So if we have to deduct amounts paid to syndicates for pension and life insurance premium, both shouldn't exceed 3,000. If we deduct for one of them, also it shouldn't exceed 3,000 a year. Then we reach to the tax base or tax bracket, so the amount should be taxable. This is how to reach to the tax base or tax bracket determination. Then tax bracket determination, the first step to determine revenues, and these revenues are organized according to the tax declaration announced by the tax authority for each year, and then we deduct all expenses and the costs necessary to practice this profession, and then we reach to the net revenues before donation. We deduct the donations according to the method I told you how to deduct these donations. Only I just remind you with only two types of donations should be deducted: donation to the government and the local administration units, and this in full, provided that you don't make losses, and also the donation paid to charitable societies, provided that it shouldn't exceed 10% of the net profit. So after we deduct the donation, we deduct other expenses, which include amounts paid to syndicate for pension and life insurance premium, and the condition for this one again is not to exceed 3,000 a year. Then we reach to the tax bracket or tax base and we start to compute the tax according to the tax rate. Okay, then if you have any difficulties in prepare this tax declaration, I explained the part of the revenues in the face-to-face lecture and the expenses here. Then if you have any questions, you can ask me in the face-to-face one, inshallah. Thank you very much, and we will continue next lecture. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.